Hi, everyone, and welcome to our EdCollab book club. Tonight, for the next hour, I'm joined by EdCollab colleagues, and we will be discussing my book with many, many Post-its in it, This Book Won't Burn by Samira Ahmed. We're going to jump right into the conversation, but we invite you, as you're watching along on whatever live you might be watching, to feel free at any time to chat. You can add your thoughts into the Facebook Live, Instagram Live, or on the YouTube live chat. We'll be able to see your comments, and we might respond to some of them, like Shauna typed woohoo, and there she is on the screen. And here's Jessica saying hi. So please feel free to respond to our conversation, to answer the same questions that we're posing to one another, or to ask your own questions as well, too. We also plan to have our special guest, Samira Ahmed, the author of this book, who will be joining us in about a half hour. And we have some questions for her as well. And so please feel free to share your own questions as well, too. All right, so let's jump right in. I think a good way to get ourselves started is with a quick reactions. We can do a quick go around. And if you're watching along with us, feel free to type your quick reactions as well, too. You're like 1 to 3 word reactions to these first 16 chapters of the book. So I'll turn it over to the group.
I would say heartbreaking. The whole family scene at the beginning, and then the dad going out was just like, it was heartbreaking.
Timely. It feels really, really timely and familiar. And it's sad. Given what's in there, it's really sad, but it's really familiar and timely right now.
Yeah, I would also like to say that it's definitely relatable. I think we're all feeling everything that's happening in just the first 16 chapters. And it's totally brought me back to my youth, down to like these scenes of like like after youth group in the masjid parking lot and like an auntie looking at you. So relatable on all levels.
And I would say infuriating, but along with that, because Samira is such a wonderful writer, there's like these moments of just really funny, amusing, pop culture, relatable stuff too. So it's just a very well-rounded book.
And I agree with the sentiments around like timely. It just feels like it's written today. And to build on, Shauna, what you said, I found myself like even the things like the love interests, there were times where I was like, which team am I on? And I was like, no, this is too serious for that. But it's so real in the way that we all have complex lives. There, we are humans who love, and we're humans who are dealing with the world around us. So yes, I love all of it. All right, so we have lots of questions that we brainstormed ahead of time to get us started. So I'll jump off with the first one. So one thing we noted very early in the book is the symbolism around fire. So I'm wondering if we could just start a conversation there, things that stood out to you or questions that were raised for you.
I think the flashback of her burning her finger and her father kind of being there to say, I'm not always going to be around. But I mean, it's just everywhere in the first like couple of pages. Oh yeah, he says, you can't play with matches. I might not always be here to put out the fire. And it's just like, you find out a few pages later, no, he's not.
Yeah, he won't be there.
Literally
And I loved how that scar then becomes something that she just keeps coming back to. And it's almost this like, I'm sure it's more than this, but one of the things the scar seems to me seems to be her dad in a way, that even though he's away, she's like in those moments of stress or things, she's back there feeling the scar and thinking about him.
Especially considering that her and her dad were closer in personalities and, and how they approach things, that she's always going back to him. And I'm sure it's hard for her to keep going back. It's like a reminder every single time she touches it.
And just one, I should have grabbed some comments ahead of time. Michelle Sanchez was saying in a quick reaction to it, she wishes her students could be reading something like this, could have read something like this. And certainly we're so glad that this book is out in the world for them.
Yeah, just going back to the fire thing, I think we don't see it as much now, but it's just been a historical thing that books have been burned in a variety of different ways and by a variety of different people. And when we look back at in the past, the patterns, seeing who has done that book burning is really clear. It's clear that there are specific groups and people who are engaged in that kind of activism that is ideological, and so I'm really curious to know how the fire motif is going to continue throughout the book, because it was there a lot at the beginning, especially.
A line that really stood out to me at the start, going with the fire motif: a single lick of flame can scorch the entire earth. And given that this book is talking, about book bans and of course other things, I was just thinking about my context here in Texas, where it just took like a single person or a single group, right, to start talking about certain things and book bannings, and then it's literally scorched the face of education, right? So it's really, I love that line for so many reasons, because we're seeing that where it just takes a small group, and then boom, the fire spreads, and then now we have this thing that we have to put out before it consumes everything.
And what page is that on? I saw
The
you
very
putting it
first one,
on the market.
chapter 1, how at the end of that first paragraph, but for all its cozy
Oh,
comforts,
yes.
a single lick of flame can scorch the entire earth.
Yes, and that, I love how you raise that, because like the way that it seems to be juxtaposed against like cold, like the cold of Chicago feels like home to her. It feels like in the beginning, but that like lick of flames can scorch the earth. Like in the example you raised, it can cause horrible things to happen. But there's a way too, like as we're getting through these first 16 chapters, where also that like her starting this readings outside just off campus is its own version of a flame. So to Shauna's point earlier, I wonder how that motif is going to play out later. We have Lisa, who's joining us. Hi, Lisa. Lisa says, I'm so excited to bring this book to our Teach the Truth rally in a few weeks on June 8th in Cleveland. And I know participants are going to love it. Hooray.
I feel like too, when I'm thinking about that fire, I'm thinking about it, like you were saying, Chris, in a way that is not about the people who are calling for these challenges and bans, but the people who are doing something about it. And how Samira's, again, just going back to her writing, I just, there are moments where in this day and age, it's like, I want to like just poke the book and have a fire motif go up, just like we do on social media, because there are so many of those moments where I'm like, yes, like a fire motif, fire. And one of those things that I loved, that I do love about this book, is that she is not afraid to just bring so many pieces into the story. Like there was this aspect, and I think you called it bubbles of queer acceptance. There was this moment where Noor is thinking about her friend back home, and she uses the singular they. Samira uses the singular they in just a way that's so normalized, and there's no explanation for why. And there are moments like that where I'm just like, yes, like that. I just picture that fire reaction, like when you're on a Facebook Live, because she just is so good at just not intentionally throwing those pieces in, but there are so many of those moments where I'm just like, yes, there she goes. I see what you're doing here.
And you can tell she was a former teacher, because she's modeling the language in the book for for readers, right? And it's like
Yes.
model, and not just the language, but like the steps that you can take. Here's what this can look like. Like it's just the perfect model for this kind of work, right? That our students are experiencing, teachers are experiencing, educators. Like it's just it is a book that like everybody needs to read. Like it's great for young
Yeah.
people, but as a teacher myself who teaches young people and, you know, wants them to be civically engaged, like it's just the perfect model for like, this is how you speak, this is how you do this kind of work. Just love it.
Yeah, and I think she does that across like so far in these 16 chapters where she's bringing in so like eloquently like the reality of what's happening, where we totally, like you said, Sean, like, oh, I see what you did there kind of thing. Those moments where it's not obvious, it's not necessarily direct, but it's just so naturally intertwined into the story that we're reading, where we're lost in the story, but it's like, oh wait, hold up, I see what you're saying here, you know, like it's that moment where she exactly where she does that so well.
And with both of these, like what it's illustrating, and Shauna bringing up the like normalizing the singular they and like queer acceptance. I was so struck by the scene, and I can't remember exactly where it was. I took my notes over here. It was a bit later in the book. Where did I put? Oh, around page 34, when she is comparing the lab school where she came from to the current district and saying like, oh, we've talked about pronouns since elementary school. And I was just struck by thinking like, I live in New York City and I live in no part of any city is totally inclusive and totally welcoming, but it feels safe and welcoming to be queer in the neighborhood that I'm in and in much of the city that I go to. And so it's very easy for me to feel like, oh, this is how life is. And I get that there are some pockets where things are hard, but you know, I'm used to it. And so that through her eyes, I can see how it's instructive regardless of where you're from. Like if you are me from my neighborhood and then seeing like not every queer life feels safe in the same way that I might, or if you're used to what sounds like is happening in her community of like there's homophobia that everyone just it exists and everyone accepts it, that there's another life too. Like the school that's just 2 hours that way, kids have been having conversations that you're afraid to have now. And I found that really instructive as well. There's another line of conversation in the chat. Quasim says, I love how the story of Noor's father leaving intertwines with the book planning plot line.
Yeah, there's a line where when it goes to the second chapter and it's like, you know, however many months later, and I just lost it, but let's see, where was it? Must be chapter 2. Oh, here it is. Just questioning her father leaving. It's page 13. Kind of halfway down and talking about, she went down the rabbit hole of like men giving up and this like runaway husbands. And about halfway down the page, she said, he set a fire and walked away, not caring that it burned down everything he claimed to once love to infinity. Now and forever, I'll be haunted by the words Dad whispered to me when I was little. I might not always be there to put out the fire. I didn't realize he meant he'd be the arsonist. And it's just so like all the layers, you know.
Fire.
Oh gosh.
And this, well, okay, one thing we're too early in the book to know for sure, is that there's something going on with the mall, right? And there was like this thing with the mom being like, well, there's more reasons than you know, Noor. And so I don't fully know everything that happened with the dad. I don't know everything that's going on with the family, but the fact that Noor has this duality of she's so hurt and harmed by their separation and her father leaving, and at the same time, like to Qasim's point, all of his knowledge and activism and ways he works through the law and policy is guiding a lot of what she's doing. Like every time she's stuck, a lot of the advice seems to be it's her dad that comes back.
So complex. Yeah, she hates him, but he's there always, like that scar, like just always there, like kind of, you know, speaking through her like in so many ways too. So it's just so that's why I said it's heartbreaking, because it's just like, oh, is he horrible, or did he raise this, he raised this amazing young person? Like it's just so complex but so real. Like that's just another reason why I just love the characters and just everything she's done here.
I think something that I can appreciate, because it is a heartbreaking story, because this is a man who she's looked up to him. Clearly, he has done all these amazing things. He's instilling these amazing principles in her, right? That's guiding her to do what she's doing. But I think what I can appreciate about the heartbreak is, I think, like, it's teaching us an important lesson to that we're flawed human beings. And so while her dad totally lit their family on fire, but here are these things that this man accomplished. Like when she tells the story of how the parents met, like he saw the mom at a protest and they did this and they, so like, I think that's something teenagers in homes going through those things, and even us as adults have to deal with, like, the flawed nature that we have, and just the duality of being complex people. He does these great things. She hates him for what he does, but like when you separate, I guess, like, we always say it's hard to separate the person from this, but like her dad is literally this activist, but he's also dad, he's also husband, and he dropped the ball with dad and husband, but this activist side is what's guiding her and has shaped her. So I think it's interesting. I'm curious to see how this plays out. Does he come back? Is there more reasons why he left? And she can come to terms with, yes, he's a flawed individual, or he's just a crap human. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just figuring that out. But I think it's a really cool lesson here, because we tend to idolize certain people and not separate certain things. And so I'm curious to see how that plays out.
That also leads to, I love how Samira doesn't let us have the easy answer to anyone. And so that there's so many characters that fit into that. So like Andrew, for example, I think I'm Team Andrew sometimes, and then I'm not, and I'm not sure what to do. There's late into, it's like around chapter 14, 15, 16, where she finds out why Faiz doesn't like Andrew because of the way that he and his friends treated him in fourth grade. And at some point she even asks, like, should I hold someone accountable to their bad deeds in fourth grade? And what about the friends they choose to have now? And they make him so dreamy, like all the descriptions of him, he's this dreamy Andrew, but then there's this side to him. But I guess to your point, it's like the dad too. He's so complicated. You can't just accept someone as being one perfect way.
Correct. Like the idea of redemption. Does Andrew get to have some kind of redemption? Can he, like, given what he did to her now new friend, and it's one of those things, again, it's very teenage, right? I see this with my own kid. Like, this person wronged this other person, and so do I pick a side? Do I allow them to, do I extend grace because they've changed and we honor that, that change in that person? So again, yeah, it's one of those characters. We have to see how that plays out. Does Andrew get any grace? Is he truly a different person? But something else that I appreciate throughout the book, while we're talking about this very important issue of book bans, we still get to see other aspects of Nora's life as ethnic individual in a predominantly white area. I related to the food, bringing the food, and people talking about the food being smelly and what that does. Being assigned the other Black kid to tour you on campus. All of those things are very real experiences that's happening alongside the book ban, the other serious issues. So I like seeing those moments in there as well, because there's other points to connect to.
I'm wondering, could you say more about that? Because I felt two ways about as being the one to meet her? Like on the one hand, I was like, oh, maybe there's familiarities, so that makes sense. And on the other, it felt like, to you said, was it just a stereotypical decision of like, well, you're a Muslim kid, here's someone else, go talk to each other?
I felt like it was a stereotypical move, especially when she had that encounter with the principal, talking about, "Oh, we honor diversity here and blah
Hmm.
blah blah," but your shirt is horrible, and and so it makes me feel like that was the safest thing for them to do, is to show her, "Hey, we have this other kid. You're not alone." And I guess part of it is my bias from my own personal experiences as being the only Black kid in a space, and then they find another Black kid or another immigrant to tour me around, because surely she'll like it here and feel comfortable here if that's who tours her versus somebody else.
I appreciate that.
And she talks about that. I'm trying to find that part where
Mhm.
she talks about how they assume, that there's a couple other students of color, and they assume that we're all going to just hang out together because we're all kids of color. And so I'm trying to find where she mentions that. And at the same time, I wonder how Faze feels too. Like he's the token, Muslim kid who was chosen to give a tour to the new Desi girl. And at the same time, thinking of like how it's playing out, it did also work out for her. It brought her that sense of comfort. There was familiarity. And so I think it's kind of like how it's approached too. Like I'm thinking about how schools are and who gives the school tours and all of that. I think it is something that people have, admin has to be intentional about when deciding that and giving it to the opportunity to all the students. So it's not this like token person, or like who are you going to put on like the marketing material for your school to represent diversity. And I think there's a lot to be said about that.
I appreciate that highlight of like,
Mhm.
as administrators too, this is instructive. You have to have a reason why you have who's touring the school. You have to be thoughtful about that.
But I did love that for her, that she found her people right away, because she had this like crazy trauma from her dad and then moving to the middle of nowhere from Chicago. And it was like, oh, thank goodness she has like, Faze and Juniper right away, like kind of found her people right away. It was just like, she needs something good going her way.
Another in the chat, Cindy Gerwin. Hi, Cindy. She's saying she also is really interested in the kind of bittersweet relationship with the dad, and that it reminds her of Lori Halls Anderson's Speak, and the importance of some of the male relationships inside of that in the process of healing. And so she was drawing some connections to that. Thank you for tuning in, Cindy.
Can I go back to this idea of that honoring diversity and the question of, would it be better to have her get the tour from someone who looks similar to her, at least in one aspect, but, but just juxtaposed with that idea, like, oh, is this the reason why? The most, because one of my words was infuriating. And I was most infuriated, as probably many of you were, with the principal and the principal's reaction to the shirt she was wearing, and how, it just is such a perfect example of what we hear all the time. He says, you'll find plenty of welcoming folks here in a culture of acceptance. Honoring diversity is one of the key tenets of Bulldog citizenship. And again, with the humor that Samira adds to this, she uses the phrase catchphrase soup, I think, which is so great, because that is just so what I feel like that is just so such a big aspect of even these places or even these schools and districts that think they're doing the work. It's always around, in so many cases, around this honoring diversity, as if that's the work or that's the only work. And it's almost like there's this, they can't get out of that space where we're actually kind of digging into other concepts and ideas and really transforming systems. And it just, that part just made me so angry, but in a good way, because it keeps, she just keeps us engaged throughout the book with things like that, because it is so true to what's happening in so many places.
And I like that she gave new language, stewards of diversity, like the
Yeah.
action part.
Yes.
That was really, really cool. And I guess that's the teacher in her too, right? Like showing showing us and giving us the tools and the language. Because I sat with them like stewards of diversity.
Mhm.
What does it mean to be a steward? What does stewardship look like? It's very active, right? Honoring can just be really performative, very simple, showcasey. Here's this pretty book. It's diverse versus, like you said, Shauna, really doing the work. So I like how she plugs in. Here's the language you can use. Here are the steps you can take. It's really powerful.
And that principle is just so awful. And one thing, I know we were talking a little tiny bit, and then Jessica reminded us, save it for the actual book club. But we were saying, like, there are times where you almost want to be like, is that a bit much? Like would the principal really be that way? Until you actually think of some, not all. There are terrific administrators, but there are some conversations I've been in where you're like, that is exactly what came out of someone's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of like showy, I love the small details that she includes of like his office was so sparse, there weren't even like notepads anywhere. So it really makes you think, what is he doing all day other than marching around? Yeah.
Yeah. If I can mention too something that stood out to me on page 59 when she's talking to Andrew at during detention, and kind of basically emphasizing, like, she's saying it's not that big of a deal. What are you talking about? Ever heard of freedom of speech? Banning books is some Nazi level BS. And he's like surprised. He's like, isn't that a little dramatic that you're bringing that up? And then she says, first they ban books, then they burn them, then they make people enemies of the state. And it's crazy, like how she's talking about that and how that's happening currently right now, and how that's the start, or the censorship at the university campuses, and how we wouldn't have ever dreamed that, in 2024, that's a consequence of speaking out, and almost that you are becoming enemy of the state and being arrested on your campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but like see the relationship to what's happening today. And just before, because I know she's going to come on soon, hopefully, it also, I feel like there's an effort in society for like the youth to be distracted. So like, whether it's through social media, like there's just this force of distraction to veer us away from reality and what's happening, and to kind of also find our voice. And so I think on page 87, following like kind of the conversation that she was having with Andrew, that stood out to me too, kind of 2/3 of the way down, is she says, reading is dangerous because it shows us the truth. Words give us power. That's why some adults want to silence us. Yeah.
I had that, yes, underlined, starred.
Highlighted it, all the colors, right?
Yes.
Like there it is. Like it sums it
And I
up.
want that on a shirt. Reading is dangerous because it shows us the truth. Oh.
Yeah.
And then the next line too. Yes, words give us power. That's why some adults want to silence us.
Exactly.
So I think it's a good time to, as we're talking about beautiful language, to bring in the author of that language.
Yes.
So happy and we're so lucky and honored to have Samira Ahmed, the author of This Book Won't Burn, that we're discussing tonight, to join us once again. She was our opening keynote to our spring gathering, and her keynote is fantastic. You can find it on our YouTube channel. And we are so lucky to have you here tonight. Thank you, Samira, for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep. Perfect.
Okay, great. Thanks. I was actually here a few minutes early so I could listen to the conversation. I'm so glad you picked up on that note of like the principal's desk being totally uncluttered. Because I used to be a former school teacher. So if I walk into anyone's office and I'm like, where is at least the in and out box? Because I had a principal when I was a teacher. It wasn't quite as pristine as the principal's desk in this book, but it was very like devoid of papers. And I was like, I felt like there was something wrong with that.
It's school. There should be things
I
happening.
know, exactly. I was like, I want there to be a little bit more of a mess.
So we have a few questions for you. I'll turn it over to Amira to get us started.
We're so excited, first of all, for you to be here with us. It's just, thank you for taking the time out to do that.
Of course, hi, Amira.
Thank you. So, what inspired this particular story? Was there a specific incident, an experience? Is there something that you can share with us?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I always say that my books start, I have like 3 sort of foundational pillars, I guess, for my books, and they're a character, a conflict, or a question. And my novels usually start with one of those 3 things. And for this one in particular, it started with a question that was posed to me by a teacher. And this was 3 years ago when the book banners were just sort of like picking up steam, I guess. And I met this teacher who was from pretty much an all-white rural district, a smallish district. And she wanted to teach internment in her lit circles. Like she wanted to bring it as a choice book for lit circles. And in her district, 2 other faculty members objected to that book being there. So for people who don't know, Internment is my second novel. And 2 other teachers objected to it being there. One said something like, we don't think we should teach that book in this school. And the other one sort of gave this like ridiculous reason of there's no South Asians or Muslim kids at the school. Every time I hear anything like that, I'm like, well, you probably don't have hobbits or dragons either, but there's books in your library with hobbits in them and also dragons. But that's as an aside. But so she said to me, like, I never had that experience before, Samira, and I got kind of like scared, like, wait, are they going to report me to the principal, the superintendent? Like, what's going to happen here? And she was like, look, I am a single mom and I'm the primary wage earner in my home. And honestly, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. And so I sort of gave in and I didn't really push back. But then she said she also felt like she wanted to have books like mine there because the kids should have a diversity of voices in the classroom and understand that their world is something that looks different beyond, like, so there's something beyond these 4 walls of the school. And she's like, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to push back. And so my question to you, Samira, is how can I be brave? And I thought this was such a brilliant and also poignant question because I was like, oh my God, this person is literally just trying to bring a book to a kid, her actual job.
Yes.
And she needs to be put in the position of asking me, the author, how can I be brave? Now, honestly, I don't want any teacher to lose their job over teaching my book or any librarian because they're having it on their bookshelves. And so I felt like for her in this situation, she was being brave just by positing the idea of having the book there, just by showing her colleagues and, maybe even her students that she was reading books that are sort of beyond what the traditional curriculum is. But I don't know, that question really resonated with me. How can I be brave? And it's a question that a lot of the characters in This Book Won't Burn also have to ask of themselves. It's questions that we as authors have to ask. It's certainly a question that librarians and teachers currently are having to ask themselves. And I thought, that is going to be the basis of my book. So that question is what kind of led to this book. How are kids choosing to be brave? And because I always think like kids are put in positions where they're forced to find their courage because of like really bad decisions that adults make. And I think like that's just so wrong and unfair. And I really wish that we could build a world where kids weren't in a position that they had to find their courage. Like, dang, can't we just have kids? Can't we just like let kids be soft? Like, can't we just let there be childhood without inflicting like so much difficulty on our children? And the answer is, I guess we can't because people like the principal exist. But I wanted to talk about how kids are dealing with all that, even in the face of trauma, as in this book and the father leaving her, because kids, someone said to me, well, I don't know, you make the kids go through a lot of stuff. And I was like, what do you think actually happens in real life? Because it's not like, a kid whose parents are getting divorced or separated or who's suffering some other trauma doesn't also have all the other crap going on in high school. Like, I was like, that's what high school and being a teenager can be. I mean, I hope that there's kids who don't have to suffer through all that, but kids have to they're doing all that and still going to class and still doing their homework and still, trying to figure out a way to use their voices to make something better.
I think that harkens back to one thing we were talking about earlier. And now that you're here, we can thank you in person as well. We were just saying how complex and real the characters are. Like, you don't allow us as readers to just judge one person in one way. And so I love that additional layer of just thinking about how, yeah, she still has to go to school, take AP, get to graduation, while her family's falling apart or changing, while she's not quite sure what to do with her life. And just that way that characters aren't only good or bad, and they aren't just in one simple path, it's so engaging for us as readers.
Okay, thank you. I think it's really important to me to have characters, even like the quote unquote bad guys, the kids, in terms of the kids who are we see how they're just kind of reflecting what they're hearing, like the sort of propaganda that they're hearing from the adults around them. And I feel like that was something that I just had to write about, especially because of us living right now. We live in this age of disinformation and like misinformation, and we're struggling to figure out how we can teach our kids to find truth and fact in the midst of all of this morass of straight up lies that are told by adults so often. And yeah, I try to have that piece in there, because I mean, I think ultimately, I think adults have to bear a much bigger responsibility for their behavior. I mean, obviously kids should also be held accountable. Kids should understand the difference between, intent and impact and all of those things. But, there's not an equivalency between a 17-year-old kid and a 40-year-old man who is essentially attacking a kid.
Yeah. Just to add, Cindy says in the chat that she finds kids to be so much better at being open to learning about multiple perspectives than adults are, even though they can be simultaneously also so cruel to one another as well, too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that cruelty to each other, I mean, we see that in the book. And I feel like for kids, it comes so much out of, number one, like a reflection of the adults around them and what's being modeled. And also, like, I think it comes out of often a place of fear, like not just hate, but also fear and like the desire to feel included in a way, or to feel like they don't want to be the one put on the outside. So they want to scapegoat someone else. And of course, they learned that from the adults around them, because, I mean, kids are more willing to understand other perspectives, I think. It feels like adults are the ones who have their brains somehow cemented with certain ideas, and kids have like that flexibility. It doesn't mean they all do. And like, look, I was a teacher too. There were definitely some kids where I was like, WTF, why is this kid in my class? Like, I mean, okay. And then, then on parent night, you're like, oh, now I know. Like, I totally understand. And then you want to try to still have sympathy for the kids. But like, I think, yeah, I don't know. It's tough because there are kids who inflict horrible cruelties on one another, and they do need to be held accountable for that too.
Well, I think, I love that the core question is, how can I be brave? And that this book is the answer to that question. Because we've talked a little bit kind of off screen about this book is just like a guidebook for so many different things, modeling inclusive language, for showing kids how to step up and use their voice. Like, there's just so many different ways to use this as a model. I think one of the questions that we keep coming back to is thinking about the setting, because it is set in Illinois, and Illinois recently became the first state to outlaw banning books.
Right.
And so the move from her, Chicago neighborhood, Hyde Park, down to, Bayberry and Champaign, which Champaign is a real place.
Right. Bayberry's, that's made up, but yes, it is.
Yes.
It's loosely based on, I looked at demographics of towns around Champaign, Urbana, like the smaller towns. And because I was like, okay, is it unrealistic to be like this district is 98% white? Actually, it's not. And there are obviously wealthy districts around there. But Illinois, for people who are from here, like Chicago is a giant blue dot. I mean, like we don't even have primaries like for our mayor because no one who's a Republican can win. But I think I wanted her to, I mean, like, I have this experience too. Like I drove down for like the Illinois Reading Council, I think IRC.
Yes,
am I making this up?
yeah.
Okay. I was like, wait, am I making this up? And it was like a couple years ago, and it was like in Southern Illinois. I drove down from Chicago, and driving home, I'm like driving through a small town. It's like dusk, and I'm stopped at like a train tracks in sort of the middle of town. And on my left is a house that has a giant Confederate flag flying. And I'm like literally panicking in my car because I'm like, oh my God, like train, get out of here. I just need to move past this house. So, I wanted to put her in this situation where she's coming from a very, liberal place. I mean, Hyde Park is Obama's old neighborhood. It's about as liberal as you can get. I wanted her to see some of the stark differences, but also I didn't want, I grew up in a small town. And so I know that there's going to be people who are like, but it's not fair that you're painting small towns like this. And it's not like every single person there's a bad guy, because she does find allies, and she finds adults who are willing to also speak up. Like, and it's not just the librarian who is like a renegade librarian, because like kind of all librarians are, at least the good ones in my mind. And then, but she also finds like, hey, you know what, the owner of like that ice cream shop who was like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to pay for the books in this little freedom library that you have outside of my shop because it's wrong. And then, when the parents and the community members do finally show up at the big school board meeting, and there are allies, of course there are, because we know that the majority, actually don't want book bans, but at the same time, we know there's this vocal minority. Obviously in the book, I call it not Moms for Liberty, but Liberty Moms and Dads.
Moms and dads. Yeah, I love that.
I wanted to be inclusive of like the haters. Also, no, I don't want to get sued by Moms for Liberty. I'm already on their crap list, I'm sure. But I just want, I think downstate Illinois, like it is, like shockingly, like even in that town, that tiny town with that Confederate flag on that house, I 100% believe there's people who voted for Barack Obama there, and they're the same people who maybe the next time voted for Trump. And they're just, so you have these towns that are these sort of like purplish towns, I guess. And, I think it's interesting because you see more, obviously in progressive towns, you see people like arguing too, but it's like progressive love to argue with each other about, frankly, a lot of stupid crap, which I'm like, we're on the same side, just agree. We have the enemy is not each other. But in this, I wanted people to see like where, people are butting heads. Like I actually spoke at a school board meeting in Niles, Michigan, which it's like an hour from Chicago, from where I live in Chicago. And it's kind of a small community, but everybody knows each other. And they were the school board had just had pretty big turnover. And they actually had like a MAGA presence on the school board. They actually got federal money, like they got funding from like federal groups, like national groups rather, for this tiny, tiny school board in this tiny town in Michigan. And they were trying to withhold 200 books that We Need Diverse Books had donated to the school district based on a grant that the teachers and librarians there had applied for. And at the school board meeting, it was so contentious in the small town. Like the teachers and librarians and like some community members were literally crying. They're like, on their Facebook page, like some of the teachers and librarians have been called pedophiles. They've been doxxed. They've been treated so, so terribly. And these are their neighbors. And that was the school district that was trying to withhold hollow fires and internment from the library shelves, and along with like 50 picture books. So in a small town like this, like people all know each other. And they've grown up together, some of them, and they're still like at each other's throats for this because they've politicized reading. And because they're trying to find a way to hang on to like white supremacy, I guess, as much as they possibly can.
Along that same point of complexity, well, first, from the chat on Instagram, Team Boehm says, the setting is so interesting. Having moved from Florida to Central Illinois in the past year, this book helped me process community-based censorship versus state-enacted censorship.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I made note of wherever it came, I think of it earlier in the book, how the school board in the book was split. I think it was 3-2. So even in that way, it's not the entire school board voting for this policy that just freely allows books to be removed from shelves.
Right.
There are at least 2 members of the board who, like you were saying, are in the same community. We're like, no, this is strange.
Right. And then there was like the one swing vote. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but sometimes that's what, I mean, I've been to so many school board meetings as a former teacher and stuff. And so, you know, sometimes it can just come down to the one person. And that's why I'm always telling people, like, wherever I go, and I especially tell this to students. And I also taught seniors, and I was like, oh, you're about to be 18 before the next election. You can register to vote when you're 17, as long as you're 18 before the next one. And I mean, I brought in voter registration slips to my class because I'm like, this is not partisan. It's for everybody. But those local elections, I mean, those school board, I mean, I don't need to tell you guys. I don't know why I'm saying this to you because you all know, but those school board spots can be decided by like literally a literal handful of votes. It could be 5 votes or 10 votes. And that's why for the This Book Won't Burn book tour, everywhere I go, people are asking me, what should I do? And I was like, literally register to vote and vote in every single election and get 5 people to go with you to your library board elections and your school board elections and your whatever. If you got a mayor or a community council or like whatever, I was like, those 5 people and you could actually swing the vote. And I think we have time for one more.
Sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead. Sure, yeah. So this question has been coming up on IG. Someone mentioned like the question, how can I be brave? Framing that is really great for appearing in mentor texts. And that made me start thinking about the banned books you selected and the quotes. How did you go about deciding on those particular books and using the quotes that you did? Because I was like, oh my God, this is a unit study right here. So
I'm so glad that I hope it can give you like a few ideas for that. I love if I can provide teachers with any help at all with any of my books. So for the pull quotes, I sort of, as I started writing the book, I was kind of keeping a list of books that I had in mind, because obviously I could have chosen many, many, many books, but I was number one trying to have an array of books. Like I wanted to make sure I had an array of books by queer authors. Like I wanted to make sure there was a non-binary author, a trans author. I wanted to make sure like Lori's book is in there because even though her book is not, she's neither BIPOC or queer, it's a book that's addressing sexual assault, which is the other major category of books that are being banned. I wanted to make sure that, like, I wanted there to sort of be a tie-in with the characters when they're reading from that passage. So, for example, I think I have Juniper Reads from Ash by Melinda Lowe. And, you know, Juniper is like my cute little baby lesbian. Like, she's just like, I really wanted, I wanted her to have just like a sweet little, like a tiny little bit of romance, like just on the side, you know. And she's so nervous and she just is like awkward and she doesn't know how to ask a girl out, or like she doesn't really know what to do. And I wanted her just to have this moment of reading the book and just having like, like, you know, I wanted her to have like a little moment of like, yeah, I can be the romantic hero and I can have this little moment. And I wanted that for her. And the same thing like with Sophia, like she read from Anger is a Gift by Mark Oshiro. And I loved that passage because I talk a lot about how rage and anger are tools that I use. It's a motivator for me, and it is a motivator for Noor. I think somebody asked about this. Like, yeah, Noor's anger about her father is part and parcel of her activism in the situation. Totally, because I think that is a great way to use that feeling that you're having in a productive way. Like, because, you know, sometimes you have like, especially when you're a teenager, you've got all these pent up feelings and you're not sure how to do with it. And like, it's a destructive force, but you can use it for good. You know, and I think I also referenced like just other books, like when she went to the bookstore and books that she's just wanting to buy, because I was trying to get as many books that I also love in there. And I know that these were all the books that I chose have been banned in some form or another. And so I guess I wanted to choose books that I thought, number one, that I've obviously read, that I think were super appealing to kids, that I, as a teacher, wish maybe I had in my classroom library when I was teaching. And I just wanted the pull quotes to be a little bit of a reflection. You know how we always are like, you know, books can save your life, or like a book can connect you to another person, or a book can build empathy. So I just wanted to build in those tiny little moments of connections between the books and the kids who are reading them. So I'm glad that you like them. I mean, I wish I could have put in more. Like my original idea, I actually don't think I've told anyone this, but my original idea when I way back in the beginning was thinking of this book I was thinking of actually having intercalary chapters of a banned book, but it would be a fictional banned book that I just made up. And that would be read in, but then it's like basically writing two books. I was like, wait, I don't think I could do this. And I couldn't fit like both of a whole book. So it would just be excerpts, and I couldn't quite get that. So, and I was like, okay, but maybe the next best thing is have Bandcamp read some of my friends' books.
And I mean, to me, as the reader, feels like a happy accident that instead of writing two books, you have all these others. Because like someone in the chat had said, I enjoy whenever I'd see a book and say, I've read that one. I just
Same.
love how, I love how it both, there are ones that I've read that I'm like, yes, and that's a great quote. I have to go back and find it. And there's others that you're introducing me to as a reader, and you certainly are doing to others as well too. So it's such a thoughtful way to include all of these other authors inside of your work as well.
Well, and I also thought it could be a fun way to hopefully, if kids are reading this, whether in class or on their own, maybe inspire them to pick up another book by someone else, or give you like some preset ideas for a lit circle on banned books, so we could have those. So yeah, it was fun. I mean, I guess that's like having my English teacher hat on. I think once you're out of the classroom, you still always are a teacher. Like you always kind of have, you know, I taught for 7 years only, so it's not that long, but it definitely informs really everything I do, like how I write. I mean, my sympathy for a lot of the teachers, I guess, comes across, but also, you know, there's some teachers who are jerks, and we all have met that teacher. We all know that teacher. So yeah, well, you know, I try to bring that experience in as much as possible.
I do love how one of the classes she feels very comfortable in is the English teacher. So thank you for
I mean, I was an English teacher, so obviously that had to be. And that poster is the English teacher is one of, and the library both have the poster of that inclusivity poster. So I mean, honestly, I just took that poster from what in my kids' classrooms. Like I was like, okay, I'm just going to copy this thing. And I remember like, because there was some parent who had objected to it and was like really upset about it. And the teacher was sort of like, well, that is actually adopted by the entire school. So if you don't like it, I guess you could say it's a private school. Send your kid to another school, I guess.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for this great book that you've given us and to all readers. We really appreciate having you here.
Great. Thank you so much for reading it, everyone, and take care. And I hope all of you have a happy summer and can take a little bit of time off and enjoy yourselves. You all deserve it.
Thank you. And while we say goodbye to Samira, I just wanted to put up on the screen, this also comes up early on in these chapters that we read in the book. There's mention of students or the librarian covering up shelves, as she's instructed to do by her district, but putting a QR code in its place. And so likely those of you joining in are aware of this, but in case you're not, the Brooklyn Public Library is now one of several libraries that have created a group called Books Unbanned, which allows any teen, anyone 13 through 21 in the entire United States, and I think to the world as well, who wants access to books that perhaps their district does not allow them, can apply for a free e-card through the Brooklyn Public Library, students in California can apply through either Brooklyn Public Library or LA, and there's a number of libraries that have joined as well. To apply to the Brooklyn Public Library, you must be between the ages of 13 and 21, and you send an email to what's on your screen there, booksunbanned@brooklynlibrary.org. And I love how, in the ways we've said already this evening, Samira has her teacher hat on and she's instructing. So the librarian puts a QR code up, which any savvy student in the library who realizes that they don't have access to the books may scan that and go straight to this website or straight to that email address. So there's an idea for all of you, depending on where you are in the world. There's ways of sneaking this to students as well, too, so that they can have access to books around them. So in our last few minutes before we close tonight's chat and getting ready for the next one coming up in 2 weeks, I'm wondering if I could pose to the group, what are some things that you are thinking about or have questions about in the next chunk of the book that we'll read?
Well, as Samira was talking, and I wish I could have said this to her, so I'm going to send her a message, because one of the things that I love the most about this book that I'm going to continue to think about are all those different layers in the book. There's the content, the story, which itself is very layered. There is the activism piece and the teaching piece, because of, all the ideas you can get through the books themselves and through the actions that the characters take. And then there's the writing, the mentorship of Samira's writing. That is just, there's just so many great places to build curriculum off of it. So I'm just very excited to continue to kind of look at those layers. And there's probably more that I'm not even thinking of.
Same, Shauna. I was mentioning earlier in our pre-show how I keep going down these rabbit holes of like, there's a line from a poem that she references. I'm going to go look up that poem. I'm going to read this whole poem. Maybe I need that book of poems. And even in the epigraph, I didn't mention this before, but the two quotes that she pulls from the National Book Award speech and then the line from the poem called Digging are just so beautiful. Like, it's just, you can pull all these different things together just to continue to like go deeper and deeper into this story. There's just so much here.
And I'm really curious. We started this conversation about talking about the fire motif, and I kind of want to see how that's going to evolve in the story into something that was a source of pain. And I'm wondering how it's going to be, if it's going to evolve into a source of hope and power and freedom.
I share some of the same things you guys just shared, but to kind of break from the mold, going back to something Christian talked about, and he was like, "Oh, it's too early. The love teams. Who's going where?"
Exactly.
I want to see, who is it going to be?
Yes.
Is it going to be this sense of familiarity and this forced connection, or is it going to be, Andrew? But if she does go with Andrew, I hope it's not from like pity, in a sense, like, oh, poor Andrew, and you fall, that type of thing. So I'm just curious to see where she goes with that,
Yeah, I keep switching between Team Andrew, Team Taz. I don't know which one. Let's see. Well, on that note and on all the conversation, thanks for all of you for joining our book club. It was such a pleasure to talk with all of you live, and for all of you tuning in on screen. We will be back together in 2 weeks as we talk about the next chunk of This Book Won't Burn. So please tune back in then. You have 2 weeks to catch up with your reading in case you just came in live tonight, and we'll see you then. Thanks, everyone. Have a terrific night.